natural process of child development is a journey from dependence on one's parents to independence from them. Parents and caregivers are essential for child survival. But through the teenage and young adult years, we naturally incline toward increasing autonomy and self-sufficiency. In the process, we discover increasing pulling away from our parents' generation and seek a place within our own generation. The hold that generations have upon us, however, reaches well beyond the divides between parents and children. Each generation represents its own unique generational culture. Children and young adults who experienced the Depression in the U.S. and who were raised in the recent Great Recession of the housing and financial institutions crash of the mid-2000s and teens experienced a form of economic insecurity that those coming of age during the boom years of the 1950s and the 1980s, children of the North African and Middle Eastern years of Arab Spring and war-torn societies will mature out of a unique context of unrest and questioning of the basic institutions of government. We all come of age during a particular matrix of international, national, and local events and cultural trends that imprint upon us a unique historical sense of the world in which we live. There is almost no experience in life that is not molded by the particular era in which we are entwined. Such generational intersections thereby influence the ways we communicate with both those within and those outside of the boundaries of our own generation. This module explores the role of generational differences in communication and some of the lessons such divides recommend for communicating more competently across such divides. There are several reasons why paying close attention to generational differences, especially the most recent millennial generation, is important to government employers and prospective employees. First, the millennial generation is soon going to be the substantial majority of the entire workforce. Indeed, this is the first time in U.S. history that 4 successive generations are working together side by side. In the U.S., those born between 1980 and the 2000s are the largest generational cohort, representing 1/3 of the population. By 2025, millennials will comprise 75% of the global workforce. Second, the millennial generation is born and raised digital. Since a wired and wireless world will be a primary modality of social and economic transactions, their skills and comfort with such technologies will be essential to continued development. Third, the world is far more globalized than ever before, and the millennial generation is not only the most ethnically diverse in history, it is probably the most tolerant and accustomed to interacting in a context of diversity. 21st century organizations will increasingly focus on providing information rather than things and commodities, and they will increasingly have a global presence, have less vertical hierarchies, and less direct supervision. To the degree that organizations increasingly recognize that human resources are their most important resource, incorporating millennials and post-millennials into a compatible workplace will be a vital strategic necessity for organizations and institutions seeking to survive and to thrive. This in turn will require attention to and understanding of the role that generations play in constructing and reflecting their cultures, societies, and workplaces. Relying predominantly on the Pew Research Center's extensive survey research in the United States, we are presently in the midst of 5 to 6 generations. The greatest, or GI generation, the generation that fought in World War I, the war to end all wars, were born between 1901 and 1927, and are now in their twilight years, 88 to over 100. They represent about 1% of the population. They are characterized by a strong sense of duty and service. The silent, or pre-boomers generation, 1928 to 1945, knew the period of peace between the world wars. The quiescence of the period is reflected in the label, the silent generation. This generation is known for its interest in career advancement, its commitment to work, responsibility, authority, and adherence to the rules. The concluding chapter of A Victory in World War II vindicated the importance of defending the ideals of country through great sacrifice. Silence sought and respected leadership, organizational loyalty, and believed in a bootstrap philosophy of responsibility and autonomy. The boomer generation, 1946 to 1964, was born into an unprecedented expansion of the middle class, built upon a new edifice of hard work in an industrious private sector, connecting with a burgeoning government sector. One of the last generations in which a single income could afford a house and higher educations for the children. Boomers may care more for the task than the organization, and are willing followers rather than born leaders. The children of the boomers emerged as Generation X, 1965 to 1980. Granted the middle income lifestyle, this generation began to reveal less interest in the rat race of seeking salary and wealth, and more interest in time off, recreation, self-actualization, and self-reliance. Spawned in the tumultuous civil rights protests, riots, anti-war protests, political scandals, and the burgeoning cultural explosions of drugs and rock and roll, this generation developed a substantial skepticism about government and institutions. Gen Xers value mentoring as much as leading or following, motivated to learn and develop their own abilities. From the increasingly disillusioned views of Gen X arose the next significant generation, the millennials, or Gen Y, 1981 to 1997. In the US, the Y generation is the most ethnically diverse, the most digitally native, and the most college-educated in history. This generation globally experienced the 9/11 terror attacks, Lula da Silva election, the launch of Facebook and iPhone, the bombing in UK, Barack Obama election, World Cup in South Africa, the Arab Spring, and the tsunami in Japan. These events indelibly shaped this generation and their outlook toward the world. The resulting workforce it represents will also be the most educated, most ethnically and gender diverse, and the largest workforce component of any generation. They get married later than any prior generation, investing their energies instead into their education and careers. Their drivers of happiness are spending time with family and friends, and developing and nurturing their ever-expansive social networks. The average Facebook user has 190 or more friends on this network and is 4 to 5 degrees of separation from anyone else on the planet. Globally, they spend 5 to 7 hours a day online. One international study of millennials across 5 developed countries found them to value and expect the following kinds of things in their job: sociability, collaboration, opportunities to learn, an emotionally engaging workplace or office environment, their own desk, mobility, flexibility in work hours and location, and an employer who values sustainability and socially responsible causes. They thrive on a rapid pace of change and seek to contribute innovation to their employer. More recently, speculation has begun to seek the key characteristics of the newest generation. Some scholars view the current 0 to 21-year-olds as extensions of the millennial generation, whereas others anticipate that this post-millennial or Gen Z generation will clearly form its own identity among the generations. It has also been referred to as the wired generation, the M2 generation, the homeland generation, and as Generation C, connected, communicating, content-centric, computerized, community-oriented, and continually clicking. Both millennials and post-millennials are typified by growing up digital. They have never known a world without the internet and the World Wide Web, a world in which the velocity of information is instantaneous, and the capacity for generating communication content and celebrity is accessible to all. Post-millennials in the U.S. spend 11 hours a day interacting with some form of media, often multitasking in the process. Over 90% claim to go online daily, and almost a quarter claim to go online almost constantly. In a continuously communicating environment, post-millennials are characterized by a high need for feedback, a low tolerance for ambiguity, a high need for cohesive, team-based, and collaborative work content. They may reveal a number of narcissistic characteristics, such as a self-confidence and self-promoting style, rife with a willingness to offer their opinion, and yet they are also highly tolerant of diverse opinions and backgrounds, and high expectations for themselves and others. Despite all the attention to generational differences, it is reassuring that what counts as competent communication remains relatively stable across these generations. When this post-millennial generation of college students was asked what their 10 most valued qualities of a competent communicator were, they identified that competent communicators, 1, are good listeners, 2, get along well with others, 3, adapt to changing situations, 4, are relaxed and comfortable when speaking, 5, know what they are talking about, 6, generally know what behavior is appropriate at any given time, 7, are interested in what others have to say, 8, treat people as individuals, 9, avoid interrupting others, and 10, are sensitive to others' needs. This list is virtually indistinguishable from the typical lists of skills valued by businesses, human resource professionals, CEOs, recruiters, and personnel administrators. The difference is less in the interpersonal skills and more in the media-based competencies that the millennial and post-millennial generations will be increasingly expected to have, and who will expect of others. Research shows that these recent generations, despite all their media and digital nativity, they still recognize that face-to-face personal encounters are the primary and most important modality of communication in their personal lives and in business. But they also recognize that business as usual and their social networks and lives will be increasingly infused by and negotiated through communication technologies. And mastering these technologies as natural extensions of the communication process will be an increasingly important competence. There are several implications for competent communication across generations. Communicators interacting across generations are likely to be more successful to the extent they are motivated, knowledgeable, and skilled in adapting their communication style, their communication context and modalities, and their communication environments. Finally, communication across generations and cultures will increasingly depend on adapting work environments. Millennials and post-millennials will increasingly feel a need for workplaces that are suited to work-life balance, flexible workspaces, healthy and ergonomic options at the workplace, and greater flexibility in scheduling and hours. Workplaces need to accommodate more team-based problem solving, meetings, and collaborative opportunities. Such workspace and workplace adaptations communicate to employees just as much as managerial feedback and coworker interaction. In summary, everyone is born into, raised in, and matures throughout their lifetime in a unique historical matrix of generations. Major cultural, national, and international events influence each generation, as do the generational bookends within which each given generation is sandwiched. Understanding the role that generational co-cultures play in a person's communication style can greatly facilitate competent interaction within and across those co-cultures and will facilitate innovation and the achievement of satisfying work and personal relationships with others. I encourage you all to become competent communicators in your organizations, communities, and networks. In our increasingly diverse and globalized society, your capacity for innovation and achievement will increase, and you will raise your level of happiness and those around you. Thank you.